Well, this is the League of Women Voters St. Paul's monthly meetup. Welcome all of you here as well as those on the viewing. This is a subject, achievement gap in our public schools. How are our schools trying to address the gap, the disparity in achievement between our non-Asian minority students and our white students? While Minnesota, again, this year was top in the nation in its ACT results, the large gap between our white and non-Asian minority students persists. There are many good ideas on how to solve this problem, and our speakers tonight will share their suggested solutions with you. Our four panelists who will discuss the issues are Karen Woodward. Karen is our program director of the St. Paul Public Schools Foundation. She oversees the Tutoring Partnership, Teacher and Community Grants Programs, and the American Corps National Service Program. With a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from the College of St. Scholastica and teaching license from Macalester College. She also serves on the board of directors of the Minnesota Minority Education Partnership and volunteers as a math tutor. I just realized I didn't know who was next. Next we have Rob Panning Miller. He is a co-founder of the Public Education Justice Alliance, which was founded 3 years ago. Mr. Miller is a social studies teacher at South Senior High School in Minneapolis Public Schools. He also served as president of the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers from 2006 to 2008, and a member of the Governing Board of Education Minnesota. That's a state teachers union, from June 2007 to June 2013. Next, Reverend Grant Abbott is a co-convener of the Minnesota Achievement Gap Committee with Don Fraser, former Minneapolis mayor and U.S. representative. Founded by Don in 2005, the Minnesota Achievement Gap Committee brings public attention to the challenges of the educational achievement gap among our students and the good work being done to end it in schools across the country. Reverend Abbott retired 2 years ago as executive director of the St. Paul Area Council of Churches. As an Episcopal priest, Reverend Abbott served St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in the St. Anthony Park neighborhood for 23 years. He also serves on the steering committee of the St. Paul Interfaith Network that works to build understanding and relationships across religious traditions. Next, we have Jeff Martin. Jeff is president of St. Paul's NAACP. A graduate of William Mitchell College of Law, Mr. Martin is a private attorney specializing in criminal defense, employment discrimination, and civil rights. He has also been a leader in the recent Ban the Box Minnesota legislation, requiring private employers to wait until someone is selected for an interview before asking about criminal records. With that, I'll open it up to our four panelists for their opening remarks. Would you like to start, Karen?
Okay. I thought with the W was my last name, I might go last. Thank you, Vicki. And thank you, League of Women Voters, for asking us all to be here. And I guess I get to start first by saying I'm not qualified or even capable of helping any of us solve the achievement gap problem, but I have some ideas and some experience working with a lot of people who I think are really smart about the achievement gap. And so I have an honored position in the community that I take very seriously to weigh in all that we're doing. You're going to hear a lot about the achievement gap tonight. I'm sure some of you have been reading about it. It makes the newspaper. Some of what you hear in the newspaper is fact, and some of it is opinion, as always. And I have a little bit more data for you to chew on as you think about the achievement gap. In front of you, there's a few pieces of paper which, if you can shuffle quietly so that the camera and the microphones don't pick up all the noise. I want you to think about the kids that you are, as adults and voters, responsible for in many ways. In St. Paul and Minneapolis, we have 100,000 kids who are school age. And in Minneapolis, 60% of those kids go to the public schools. In St. Paul, 70% of those kids go to the public schools. And the statistics show that 70% of all students are going to require, or 70% of all jobs in the future are going to require a college degree. But only half of our students who are African American and Hispanic are on track to graduate from college on time. So you do the math with me. I'm a math tutor. We can do this math together. Roughly that means that if 50% of all kids are not on track for high school, and we have 100,000 kids, and 50% of all Hispanic and Latino kids are not going to graduate from high school, that means we have about 17,000 Hispanic and African American kids who will not be graduating from high school and therefore not eligible to get college degrees for the jobs of the future. That's one probably somewhat variable statistic, but that's one thing to think about. 17,000 kids, is that acceptable? That we would have that kind of in a gap? So I would say that that's one thing we can see in the data as we look at the Department of Ed, and it compares Minneapolis and St. Paul schools and provides, in this chart that I showed you, the graduation statistic for African American students in both school districts, as well as some other data. And there's gaps. There are not enough kids graduating, and there are gaps and disparities on who is graduating across all of our data. When you think about the framing of the achievement gap, I think the thing to ask is, what is the right question? And what is happening is one of the questions that I think we have an opportunity to think about. Learning about what is happening in the public schools is one way to inform yourselves as voters. We can look at what we want our outcomes for our children to be. And as a white woman, and as many of you are, we are voters, we are educated, we are financially stable. We have a responsibility and an opportunity and a privilege to vote about issues and vote with our feet, if you will, in terms of things that we are doing in our community, to learn about the things that kids cannot vote on. And I hope that many of you who have the voting privilege that I do and have a collective power to talk about these issues and learn about these issues in a deep way can take this data and begin to see kids, even see teachers who are teaching the kids and some of the needs that kids have, some of the needs that children have and teachers have, and then the families of the kids. The children's needs are for high quality programming, and I've given you a map of the tutoring partners that the Public Schools Foundation supports. These are 18 high quality, mostly out of school time programs that are doing good work with kids, but also need to work with schools. They need to work with teachers, and so teachers need to have time to work with community organizations to provide good tutoring. These kids have families or come from homes or from living situations that the teachers often do not have time to learn about. And I would say that over most of you, your right shoulder is Skyline Tower, where there are 3,000 people living in a high-rise building, 504 families, most of whom are East African, and predominantly kids who are learning English as a second language who need tutoring and supports. How would you vote for them, and how would you support them in your voting and your choices that you could make? So that's some interesting data that's very local and very close to home for Wilder. One of the other things I think that we can do, and that one of our solutions, is to start seeing kids and families for who and what they are. Families look like a lot of different things. They don't look like a lot of the families that you come from. And we need to learn about what family means and what it means to the kids who are in our schools. It means some of their parents have the same gender. It means that some of their parents are not present. It means that they have multiple racial mixes in the families, or they're living in homes that don't look like two-bedroom homes on a street somewhere in one of our neighborhoods. Families and children in those families look like many different things in our cities. And then the kids need teachers who understand that they also need time for professional development and planning and reflection. We sent a group of teachers from our foundation on a retreat where they simply just talked and reflected on their practice as teachers. And it cost us maybe $90 a teacher to spend this day together. And we heard from the teachers, this was like a mental health opportunity for me as a teacher to spend some time thinking about my kids and the work that I have to do as a teacher. And that's a privilege that we don't get to share as very often. And teachers don't get enough time to do these kinds of things. So we have a lot of those needs to think about. I think some of the solutions are quality programming, like tutoring, like mentoring. We need to get summer learning an opportunity for every child, and they need to be good quality summer learning experiences. Teachers need summer learning and summer reflection or professional development that looks like something that they would design. I think that one of our choices we get to make in our lives is things that we choose to do for ourselves. Kids and teachers need that as well, and families need to make some choices. And they need to see themselves in the choices that we're offering as leaders and decision makers. And sometimes the families show up in our schools and don't see the welcoming environment we've promised them. They don't see themselves reflected in the community around them. But I would say that as voters and as citizens, we have a lot to say about who gets to create those welcoming environments and demand that they are there. I think all kids and teachers would say that that's a place to start. My view on the achievement gap is very broad because I'm working on behalf of all the kids. We have 38,000 roughly kids in St. Paul Public Schools. There are almost 36,000 in Minneapolis Public Schools. That's a lot of kids who need our support, and they don't vote, but we do. And we are people of privilege who get a chance to find solutions that can be helpful. And there are a lot of candidates that you will meet in the coming months who, or weeks I should say, we're getting close. The coming weeks who will have a lot to offer all of us as we think about what we can do as voters and understanding the data that you have in front of you. And the hope of all of this is there's good news. Some of your schools and the school districts are working to address some of these issues, but they're big systems. I've been told that there's like slow ships, and I'm a fast speedboat trying to race around them, trying to help things happen. And that's what we get to do as voters, is race around and figure out what's going on and then make a vote that we hope will help change the tide for some of these kids. The report that you have from the public schools in St. Paul talks about how they're creating strong schools and strong communities, but you can see the data tells us they have a long ways to go. And they're doing some incredible work to lift up issues that are very hard to talk about and issues that most of us have never talked about, like racial equity. What does that mean for most of you who are voters to watch a school community take on an issue that is very difficult to talk about, and there's no one way to talk about some of these tough issues. So the data that I've offered in front of you is one view of what's going on. I think asking the right questions is key. What do kids need? What do our teachers need? And what do we all need as voters to understand about what's happening in the community and what we can do to help shift the tide a little bit? That's probably enough for a starting point.
Rob?
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I was somewhat surprised being from Minneapolis, but I think the issues don't know any boundaries, so what we have to do here is the same on both sides of the river. So I would like to approach this in terms of some specifics. So we've heard about the issue. I would also suggest, though, that we do need to spend more time talking about what this gap is. It's become very nebulous, and we tend to think of it in terms of test scores, and we also think of really tests as defining this as much as, and I'm a classroom teacher, and teachers are not big fans of No Child Left Behind and the standardized testing movement for a variety of reasons. One of the things that's always pointed out as a positive of No Child Left Behind is that it has exposed this gap, that somehow it was mysterious and non-existent before. And I would like to suggest that's just not true. That's a myth. This has been an issue for a long time. It's been known about for a long time. And it goes well beyond testing. It goes into graduation rates, attendance rates, who gets into certain classes, who gets into gifted and talented programs. At South High School, where I teach, we look a lot at this in terms of our very getting kind of down to the ground, what's happening class by class basis. Just as an example, our music program, which is a great celebrated music program, does not have a proportional representation of students of colors. It's disproportionately white students. So this goes well beyond testing. And I actually will argue that testing is a distraction from what we really need to be doing. And it's doing a detriment to us. It's not helping to solve this problem. So I'd like to identify just a few things and hopefully keep it relatively short, and we can come back to some of these things hopefully with questions. Starting with just a real basic proposal, which is not earth-shattering, and that is to reduce class sizes. Reducing class sizes is something that has been shown in studies to be effective in closing the gap. This is not a debatable point. What gets debatable is people argue the cost, and I would suggest that we are spending lots of dollars on things that have proven to not get results. We need to take those dollars and put them into something like class size reduction. This is common sense. This is why charter schools and private schools send out flyers, and the first thing they put on there is small class size. It's what parents want, it's what students want, it's what teachers want. So a very sort of simple, common sense proposal. Second one gets more complicated, and that is that we need to think again about integration. We have completely abandoned the idea of integration in schools. We have accepted highly segregated schools, rather, and we have actually adopted policies that have promoted that. The charter school movement, there is just a study that just came out again from Myron Orfield and the University of Minnesota that shows not only do you have problems with highly segregated schools in the cities, but now this latest follow-up study has shown that in suburbs where there's a growing minority population, there is an increase that sort of matches that with charter schools that are predominantly white. And this is what I would argue is a modern form of white flight. And we have policies that are facilitating that, including the open enrollment policy among districts. I think that is creating more segregation than what it was supposed to be doing. So integrating schools is a big piece. Along with that, side by side with that, and this is something also that Myron Orfield has been advocating for years, and that is that we really need to do something about the housing situation. Subsidized housing in particular is something that is not promoting integration. In fact, it's working in the opposite direction for a variety of reasons. That needs to be taken seriously. Those are issues that are inseparable from what's happening in schools. And that's sort of a larger piece of this, is that when we're looking at the gap in schools, again, defining it in all those different ways I described, that is not something that you can act on in isolation inside a building. These are societal problems, and we need to look at it that way. So that's the second piece. The third thing is a little bit more ambiguous, perhaps, but we, especially in districts like Minneapolis and St. Paul, I would suggest we need to decentralize the school districts. Now, this is something that has to be approached with a little bit of caution, because there are a lot of people who would argue that's exactly what we're doing with charters and all of this sort of innovative reform stuff. And I would put innovative in quotes because I don't think it's terribly innovative. I think it is promoting a free market system that is contributing to the problem. I'm not suggesting a free market, open up the schools and let people kind of run wild. I'm talking about promoting a democratic system of public schools where the communities are actively engaged, where parents and teachers and students are working together, collaborating, and that I don't think is happening. There's a lot of talk towards that, but as someone on the ground in Minneapolis, I can tell you it's not happening. I can't speak for St. Paul, I'm sorry. But my guess is it's similar. So, and that, again, something I can expand on. The last thing I would like to kind of throw out there, and I'm sort of working my way to the more radical idea here, is that I think we need to eliminate the high-stakes testing. And quite frankly, the larger reform movement that is driven by the high-stakes testing need to be pushed aside. It is doing a disservice to our students. It is creating a problem. It is not closing the gap. The tests are not, again, identifying something that we don't know about. And in fact, the tests are driving our schools to narrow curriculum, to do a disservice to the students who are struggling to begin with. We should be creating schools that we would want to send our own kids to. And that's not happening with testing. Testing is driving a curriculum towards 100 minutes of reading, 100 minutes of math, extending the day so we can pack more of that in there. We're cutting down on recess and arts and music. We need to make sure that kids are getting a well-rounded education. And I'll just close with sort of what I think epitomizes this. Very close to where I live in Minneapolis, there are two schools, sit kitty corner from one another. One is Lake Country Montessori. The other one is Hiawatha. It's Adelante Prep, and that's a charter school. The other one's a private Montessori. The private Montessori costs $20-some thousand a year. The people who run Hiawatha Adelante Prep send their kids to the Montessori. The kids at the Montessori have a beautiful playground. You should go look at it. They just redesigned the outside. It's just like a wonderland to run around and play in. They have an incredibly rich experience. If you look at their sort of day-to-day and their curriculum across the year, that is an enriching experience that kids deserve. And then you look at the Adelante Prep, and it's what I would call drill and kill. And it's teaching to the test, and it's focused on the test scores, and it's depriving students of that rich experience that's happening just across the street. So I'll close there.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Grant?
Thank you again. It's a privilege to be here because I had also the privilege of being the pastor of Jerry Jenkins, who always told me what a wonderful group the St. Paul League of Women Voters was. And so I feel like I know a little something about this organization and its history and its value to the community. I'm here, what's a pastor doing here anyway? I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the man sitting in the back of the room. Don Frazier, back in 2005, started something called the Achievement Gap Committee, which grew out of the DFL Education Foundation, because Don still retained his passion for the welfare of our children. And he decided what he wanted to do was to hold regular forums that would draw attention to good work that's being done to end the achievement gap, locally and nationally, in classrooms, in schools, in districts, and to bring people from around the country who were having success to come and talk with us and to spread this information around. We continue to do that. We're in our 8th year. We're not really an advocacy organization like a lot of the, on the last page, or not, I guess it's because I attached that recent study from ETS on the back. But you'll see there are about 10 or 12 education advocacy reform organizations that are very active in the state. We're basically about trying to bring people together. We've been doing that, and it's been very valuable. You can go to mnachievementgap.com, and you can see a history of the forums we've had. And also, we videotape now those forums, so you can go and see in our archive lots of outstanding forums. I started going to this because, as the director of the St. Paul Area Council of Churches, I had the privilege of working with the people that run Project Spirit and Freedom School. Project Spirit and Freedom School were brought to the Twin Cities by my predecessor, Tom Duke. 1993, Project Spirit began in African American congregations after school. They are now programs that are in the schools and are getting support from Karen and the partnership, the tutoring program for academic excellence. And also our American Indian Youth Enrichment Program at the American Indian Magnet School. So I went to Don's forums because I just wanted to steal things. I wanted to steal ideas. I wanted our programs to be better. And I've still never been to a forum that I have not learned something and gained something of value. And we continue to do that. And if you go to the website, you can get on our mailing list and come to our forums. So we've been at this for 8 years. I just want to say a little bit about what we've learned and then what we're up to and kind of where we're heading right now. I want us to go back and think about what was it like when you were in 5th grade. Think about 5th grade. What was the makeup of that classroom and that school? How many minorities were in that classroom and in that school? How many children were poor in that classroom? In Minneapolis, I believe the statistic is now that 1 in 6 students is mobile. That means they move 3 times during the year. I know a little bit about what this was like because I, for my early years, was raised by a single mom, and I went to 6 schools in my first 4 years in different districts. It's extremely embarrassing and hard when you're constantly in motion. Just to give you a sense of things, in St. Paul we're more than 72% students of color. I think it's about close to 70. In Minneapolis, about 67%. The state of Minnesota is still 85% white and 15% people of color. And I got passionate about this because I realized we have been looking at this issue since A Nation at Risk came out in 1983. And you can go back and read A Nation at Risk, and it would still sound like it was relevant to today. That's 30 years we've been working at this, and we're not making much systemic progress. Something is going on, and I think it has to do with class, and I think it has to do with race, and I think it has to do with a large number of new Americans that have come in that are learning languages. The world has radically changed from what it was like when we were in school. But for some reason, this does not have the urgency that it deserves, I don't think. And part of the reason is we want to assume there's a simple solution to this. Just get rid of the bad teachers. Just get rid of the teachers' union, for God's sake. Just do that. And everything would be, just give us more charter schools and everything will be fine. You'll see in the notes that I handed out to you and the bibliography that's in there, I spent a lot of time reading research, reading reports, reading books, and you'll see on the back 13 things that are overwhelmingly accepted by all of these studies and all of these books that have been written. It's a complex problem. And in fact, one of the things that interests me right now is what are the necessary and sufficient actions that need to be taken? Where is the research that shows us what are the things that have to be in place? Do all 13 of these things have to be in place? And you'll see under quality of teaching, there are 4 things there as well. It's a very complex issue because education is more than schooling. And for real education to take place and for schooling to be successful, there are all kinds of things outside of school time that need to be addressed. And that's why in the Twin Cities, we've done things like the Promise Neighborhood, the North Side Achievement Zone, and Generation Next, trying to pull everybody together to work on issues such as just family stability and health, medical and dental, to just create the context and conditions so our children have the chance to learn and our teachers have healthy kids and stable families and can spend more time on schooling. You'll see in that list, you can kind of break them down into things that have to be done about schooling, but that's only 15% of the time, and then other things that need to be done around education. You all know that one of the big problems for poor children and children of color is what happens over the summer and the loss of learning. Because one of the things that I've noticed is those of us who have privileges because of our resources, we want to do everything possible to enhance our kids' education. So we send them to camps and we send them to to tutors, we get mentors for the science fair for them. We do everything possible to make sure they get advantages and advantages and advantages. And what that does is then accelerate the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And this, to me, is a challenge to the faith communities who seem to believe that everybody is of value and that we should be concerned about justice. How many of us who have all of these resources are actually saying, you know what, I can still give my resources to my kids, but maybe I don't have to give them all of those resources. Maybe I could give them to the Tutoring Partnership for Academic Excellence so they would have more resources to be able to help kids. Or give money so Freedom School, which is a 6-week summer program, literacy program for kids of color, so that more kids will have the opportunity. Because the more we take our money and our time to make sure our kids get all the advantages, we are just exacerbating the problems. So anyway, what gives me hope? What gives me hope is what Don has done. There is fabulous good work going on all around the Twin Cities and all around the country on this issue. Individual teachers, superintendents, principals, programs like Karen's that are having really positive impacts on children. And we need to celebrate those things, and those things give us hope. And I also want to say that we don't, as we work to change the system, we shouldn't give up on helping the children that are here right now. So very quickly, what we're working on now is to continue what we're doing with the forums, but can we pull all these education reform organizations together, and can we come up with at least 2 or 3 things that we all agree on instead of competing and disagreeing and fighting with each other that will really benefit our children? And we can go to the state and we can go to superintendents and say, you know, these are the things that really need to be in place. And can we, like that doctor that wrote the book, The Checklist, can we come up with a checklist of these? You can see these 13 or so things that I have on there, and go to the Minnesota Superintendents Association and to superintendents and say, how many of these are in place in your district? And not use it as a finger-pointing thing to say how terrible, because you only have 3 of them. Say, great, you've got 3. What are the next things you would like to have in place? And what are the barriers that are keeping you from having these things in place? How can we help you bringing together all of these advocacy groups, since we're not an advocacy group, to try to bring what needs to be done to schooling and to our community for the surrounding supports so that all of our kids in Minnesota have the chance to succeed to the fullness of their ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Jeffrey?
What can I say after what he said? I mean, that was impressive. But I think what comes out of that is that this is a God-sized problem. This is something that I don't think we could spend our way out of. This isn't something that we can argue our way out of, because you have opposing sides on all of these things. You got charter versus public, you've got teachers versus students, you got parents versus students, parents versus teachers. What we have to do as a society is make a decision. What do we want? Do we want all of our kids to be educated to the best of their ability, or do we only want some of our children to be educated to the best of their ability? It's just that basic of a question. Because if you want all students to be educated to the best of their ability, then you need to prioritize your spending to help make up for those who are falling behind for whatever reason. And as the pastor just said, some of them are outside of the student's control. Some of them are driven by poverty. Some of them are driven by external forces. Some of them are driven by what happens to them in the classroom. I know teachers don't want to be labeled as bad teachers or bad people, or definitely don't want to be labeled as racist. But when a kid comes to a classroom and doesn't feel welcome, and the only thing they got to separate themselves from another person who they think has been received a little bit different from them is the color of their skin, then I'm sorry, this kid is going to process it that way. He's going to take that home. And you know, the NAA, I really shouldn't be here. I mean, this Brown versus Board of Education decision was, you know, before I was born. So, you know, those people who stood in those doorways for students of color who couldn't get in to get this equal access to the American dream, something happened along the way. I don't know, we thought that opening the doors and everyone coming together in that learning environment and sharing of resources in the public school system would automatically change everything. But the problems are deeper than that. You have flight, you have people who are leaving those situations, people who never want to be around people who are not like them. And the best education a child can get is the one with the most diverse group of people in the room. And that's across economic groupings, that's across race, that's across culture. Because that's the world they live in. Now, unless they want to go stay on some secluded island in a gated community, then they're going to be among other people. And they may not always be the person in power at that time. So it'd be advantageous for our children to learn how to interact with one another. Now, I think the question that hasn't been asked is, why are our public school systems failing? Because they are. If 76 or 64% of our students are not achieving to the best of their ability, and that system is failing. Is failing. And just saying that is not a bad thing. That's just saying where we're at. It's not putting necessarily a finger in someone's eye and saying it's your problem, you did this. But I think we have to acknowledge that the system is failing. Does it need to be burned down to the ground and start all over? No. Because we waste a generation in trying to figure that out. And we can't waste not one child's life. Everyone needs to have a chance to succeed. You know, if I had an unlimited budget and thing, I guess what I would look at is that 0 to 5 age group. That 0 to 5 group, and if we could just, I don't know, put those kids in a bubble, keep them safe, keep them well fed, keep a high level of verbal interaction, keep access to books be their biggest challenge of the day. What different book are they going to read today? Not where they're going to lay their head, not are they going to get enough to eat that day, not are they in a safe environment, not is mom and dad going to always have to go to 3 and 4 jobs to support them. Because we seem to have this belief that the minority people are just lazy and not taking care of their kids. When people out there working 2 and 3 and 4 low-paying jobs, the only shifts they can get is overnight. The only times they can go is they just want to make sure that they've got a roof over their kids' heads, some type of clothes on their back, and some food to go to the next day. Yes, a lot of people are on survival mode, but that's the state of America. Not the state of just one group of people, but that's the state of America. So when we get in those states, we want to protect ourselves, our personal interests, but that's how we're going to fail. If we don't reach out to those less fortunate than us, those that don't look like us, those, and especially if your children are long grown and everyone's doing great, I mean, you have to look at that kid that may be on the total other side of town, who you don't even know. But you look at these stats and you know they're in there somewhere. And what can you do to help that child out? Is that put a pressure behind a teacher to succeed, or at least ask for help? Is that to put some pressure on the parents to make sure that every opportunity you have, you take advantage of? Is that go to your faith community and say, you know what, open your doors so that we can have after-school programming, so we can have tutoring here. Provide for those who attend your service and those who live around in your area. Right now, tonight at my church, Progressive Baptist Church on the east side, and I got a REV in front of my name too. I didn't put it there. But we've dedicated this as the year of the child, and what we want to do is, you know, we're taking on this gap, but we're not talking about it as an achievement gap. It's an opportunity gap. Because if all these kids had all that they need, they would succeed. you're not talking about a subculture or a subset of society that is less intelligent than any other. You're talking about people who have less opportunity. So if you give them what they need, they will succeed. And the first thing they need is love. First thing they need is love, compassion, and understanding. We can't look at the non-Asian minority. I've been hearing that. That's a new one. But I mean, we keep slicing people up. Pretty soon it's going to be, the right-handed. Anyway, if we don't start looking at each person as someone of worth, and what can we do to help you succeed, no matter what package you come in, no matter what issues you have. People are hurting. Communities are torn apart. Families are struggling. But are we just going to look at them like they're a movie and read about them in the paper and look at them and say, oh, that's all sad, that's so sad? Or are we going to go outside our comfort zone and really try to help pick that person up and give ourselves our time, our talent, our resources to do what we can? So when we're asked on that day,
Thank you. Amongst our questions, and it's open to whoever wants to answer it, are you concerned about how education reform, especially charter schools, has impacted equity in public education? That is, resegregation of schools, higher needs students remaining in public schools with funding being diverted away to charters and other experimental schools. Are you concerned about how education reform, especially charter schools, has impacted equity in public education? Anyone want to respond to that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm one of the people that believe that anything that challenges the status quo is a great thing. I know people get threatened when people come up with different ideas or go after a certain population of folks to work with as something, I don't know, evil even to an extent. But if someone's really invested in educating castaway children or children that people are not interested in, then I'm 100% for that. In whatever package that looks. It's not something that can be applied universally across the whole system. We know that. That's not going to work. But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these schools that are at least when students come through the door, they feel welcome. At least when they come through the door, they are greeted with an environment of, we expect high things of you. You are a great individual. You can learn. You will succeed. You come from an excellent background. If they're getting those positive messages every day and that's reinforced, then why should we stand in the way of that? Now there are also the other side of things. There are mismanaged schools. There are people that are taking advantage of people through ads of low class size, pass the test or whatever. But that shouldn't be the marketing. But I think if you have a charter school that is welcoming and taking some of the kids that aren't being successful in the public school system, I think that's great. And I think it should cause some concern to the public school system, because if what they're doing is not working and they're not adopting some of those things that are working for that population, then what is your reason for not doing it? Is it because, we don't teach that way? Or, you should open yourself up. Things are changing. When I was, when I went to school, I think the biggest thing was the ballpoint pen, and you had to go to, they got away with the pencil sharpeners but now kids are learning so many different ways and so many different avenues, and then we ask them to go into a crazy world and, okay, do all this homework that you need to do, log on online and pull down this textbook that's online, and you can do everything you need to do here, when kids can't go home and have access to the internet. They can't go to the library and log on, because guess what? Everybody else who doesn't have a computer is waiting in there to do a half an hour of time on there. Some guy's looking for a job is on there. So we're giving them, and I'm a person who has 2 kids in the public school system, and they do great. They do an excellent job because I just lucked up. I have two great kids. They love to learn. They're seeking opportunities to learn, and I just try not to get in their way. But so I mean, I believe in the public school system. I was, raised. I wasn't raised here, but I benefited from the public school system, and I think that's where the majority of people will always lie, in the public funding. But we have to make sure it's high quality, well-funded system where we give not only the students the opportunity to succeed, but the teachers an opportunity to teach. And I believe what the gentleman said here is key. If we can keep those class sizes down, because I know my daughter's in a class of at least 35 to 42 kids, and I don't know how she makes it through it, but she does it. And my son's in the higher level classes, so he doesn't have that problem. He's taking calculus 2 and all this other stuff. You don't worry about your class size anymore.
Now when you're
But yeah, when you're moving on, and he left me a long time ago. But I think you have to find that balance and not be scared of those who are trying to do things, but keep a watchful eye on those who you think that might not be doing what they should be doing.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yes.
Can I jump in on that? I'm going to give a very different answer. And in terms of the question, am I concerned? Yes, is the simple answer. And I think I kind of hinted at that earlier in my comments.
Okay.
And I would argue there are very, very few charters taking castaways. The castaways are in public schools. The charters are selective. One way or another, they are selecting students. Legally, that's not supposed to be happening. But the reality is there is a selective process. Just the fact that it's an elective action on the part of the parents creates a different dynamic in terms of, as opposed to just that's the school you go to kind of situation. So it's a very different dynamic. And while I understand the argument, and it's really a market-based argument, that this creates a competition now, and this stagnant system of public education has been given this great kick, because now you've got someone challenging you, and so you got to do things differently, as though teachers were just sort of hanging out and kind of saying, well, I've got no competition, I can do what I want. I have to say, as a teacher, for over 20 years, that's I have to take offense to that, and I know that's not the intent of his comments, but I really believe deeply that education is not about competition. It is a cooperative effort. It is for all the technology and the changes. I still like paper and pens myself, but I'm also very adept at using and integrating the technology, and we've got iPads and all the bells and whistles. At the end of the day, the kids need to have one-on-one conversation with an adult that cares about them. And we need to create public schools that do that, and it's not accomplished through competition, and it's not driven by, again, this testing regime which is the basis for that competition. So I don't think charters are helping, and I do think they're hurting. Charters are segregating. They're creating that system going against what you were just talking about in terms of kids being in a school environment that is the world environment. And I think we need to make sure that's promoted.
Yeah. Could I say something, Vicki, just a little? I think we need to remember, charter schools were invented in Minnesota by Governor Perpich.
Right.
And remember, they were designed originally to support public education.
Right.
The idea was that we were to have these things, that we're to try new things, and it wasn't to be in competition with public education. It was supposed to be a laboratory to help public education, but we've reframed it now. And I want to bring up Karen too. You know more about this probably than I, but I went and I looked at the MCA 3 data and stuff, and in the paper they listed all of the schools that were really doing well, and these were the elementary schools. And what I did when I looked at the populations in these schools, overwhelmingly, the schools that are doing really well, that are in that top 15 list, are 75% or more of one ethnic or cultural group. White, Hispanic, African American, Hmong. There's something in a culture that is still a white-dominated culture where we whites assume everybody else needs to assimilate to us. that we have to figure out how we help students that are not part of the white dominant society to have environments in which they can come to love their culture, know their own home language, and have real self-esteem on who they are. I'm an American Indian and I'm proud to be an American Indian. Because research shows when you have that kind of self-esteem, you do better in school. So, how do we do that? Project Spirit, American Indian Youth Enrichment, that's what they're all about, is trying to supplement what goes on in the school during the day with programs that enhance cultural identity and self-worth. And it's the schools that have really diverse populations that it's hard, because teachers then have to know about culturally responsive teaching. You've got kids from 9 different cultures and they're speaking 9 different languages. How do you supplement a curriculum so that it engages all of those cultures? How are you able to individualize instruction when, because of mobility, your teachers are being forced more and more to sort of follow a path that may not fit with the makeup of their class? And then to be able to go out and meet with the parents and guardians of all those children, so that there's a common accepted culture in the classroom that the teacher knows the parents have felt that their desires are actually happening in that classroom. It's a huge challenge for teachers today. Much, much more complex than to just be in a school like Hiawatha Academies, which is 90% Hispanic. Or Eric Mahmoud is doing a wonderful job, but his schools are 99.9% African American. Community School of Excellence, Mo Chang schools, 100% Hmong. So it's something we need to think about in public schools to help the teachers. How do we provide this other cultural identity and self-worth part of the curriculum? Because Jeff is right, we live now in a much more diverse culture, and once you get out of your segregated area, you're going to live in a world where there's a lot of diversity out there, and even if you're white, the world is changing pretty fast, and you're going to find yourself needing to communicate in another language, maybe in another culture, with coworkers that come from several different cultures.
Thank you, Grant. I'm going to ask at this time to kind of wrap it up, if you will. I know, Karen, you probably have some responses as well to the conversation.
I would say there's an interesting tension. I've heard a lot of things, even in that last question. We talked about equity and how we define that in the issue of equity. I don't think it's as simple as what we think about charter schools. Charter schools are public schools, and the kids who go there are also public school children. But the tension that we have is around, I think we say our kids are low income, our kids are not achieving, our kids are low achievers. I think we need to stop saying labels on our kids and talk about what is happening to the kids. The kids, how you view equity and how you define equity is not for me to call out for a child. If a child does not experience this, if a teacher does not experience equity in their worldview of education, then there's a lot of problems that come from that. I don't feel worthy of even taking on that argument of what's the right way to educate all children. We have a variety of ways we're trying to educate kids, and we are failing. We have some gaps. We also have some school districts, and they're 2 very different school districts. I've been reading a lot about what's going on in Minneapolis, and I'm thinking, I'm really happy and proud to be a parent of kids in St. Paul schools. I have a child in a charter school and a child in a traditional public school. I feel like I walk in 2 worlds many days. And I like what's happening in St. Paul because they're asking some tough questions at the administration level and in the classrooms about what does it mean to have race equity in the classroom. How do we get a child to see themselves in this classroom and in this educational process? A lot of what draws kids to charter schools and families to charter schools is they see themselves there. They see a reflection of what's important to them. And we are starting, I think, to see some of that happening in the public schools that are 60 buildings and 6,000 people. I think it can happen. I think we also have to believe in public education because it's, predominantly what we will be having to work with. It is a system. It is not perfect. In St. Paul, we also have an unusual and interesting problem, a little bit different than Minneapolis. 80% of the people in St. Paul are white people who do not have kids in the public schools anymore. The voters are interesting. They look a lot like white people who don't have kids in the public schools. But in the public schools, 75% of the kids are not white. So invert yourselves into thinking about and holding up a lens that is different. And I would invite us all as voters in St. Paul, of which I am one of you, to use the privilege that we have as voters and the privilege we have as white people to say, it is time to ask some different questions, and it is time to start looking at our students with some different questions at hand. These are not low-income students, these are not black students only. They are students who have had things happen to them, and we can change that experience as voters and decision makers. And I consider voting a way of making a decision, and that's why I think it's important to start looking at the questions and the data in many ways. The data you prompted us with about the MCA test scores is kind of interesting. 70% of the jobs are going to require a college degree. If you don't take the ACT test and the MCA test and all those acronym tests, we could go alphabet soup right here. If you don't take the ACT test, you're not going to a college to get a 4-year degree in most of the colleges. Who takes the ACT test? And starting with questions about what are those opportunity gaps that we've been talking about, and I love that that opportunity gap language. It's many things. It's very complex. And I think we just have to start asking some questions in different ways, including what we've been talking about just recently, which is what is equity for a child, for that family. And I don't think we have everything we need to define that. And I think we've missed out on a little bit of it. I also have a great hope that our public education systems can actually keep educating most kids well. I'd really like to see in my lifetime all kids educated well, and we are so far from that. We need a lot more questions being asked of us. And that's about as worthy as I feel of taking on anything else in this.
Thank you, Karen. Rob?
I think I responded.
Okay. Oh, no, it was just closing.
Oh.
Any comments that you might have? A couple of minutes?
I guess I would like to close with just a distinction because, and it kind of feeds off part of what you were just saying. In terms of, who are the kids that we're talking about here, and we talk about opportunities, and a lot of that relates to poverty. A lot of, again, what generically gets referred to as the gap, achievement, opportunity is a better term, that is often defined in terms of poverty being a huge factor. It is the biggest factor. When you look at wealthy and poor kids, that's where you have a huge gap. But if you take poverty, if you take resources out of the equation, you still have a racial gap. There's still a distinction between white students and students of color in terms of all sorts of measures, again, going beyond the tests, which I think we need to get beyond. And that needs to be looked at and discussed and addressed. And it's not an easy question to deal with or a thing to answer. Part of it is in terms of the testing. I just want to say that there are people who I've heard criticize the idea of getting rid of the testing and say, well, you're a teacher, of course you don't like the testing because that's what holds you accountable, right? And you just don't want to be accountable. Well, first of all, teachers are accountable every day. There is no greater accountability than when you're standing in front of a group of kids waiting for you to inspire them. And so we experience accountability in meaningful ways every day. That said, it's not about a fear of accountability. It is about what is helpful. And I will argue the standardized tests are part of the problem. They are part of that institutionalized racism. Now, there are issues of individual racism that play out. There are people whose prejudice come out in terms of their actions that wind up discriminating against students. That absolutely happens. That should be addressed. That's something that teachers and all of us, just as members of society, need to work on. We're all kind of guilty of having prejudice. We need to make sure that's human. But the difference is making sure that prejudice doesn't display itself in the form of discrimination. So that's a challenging thing to do. Teachers have to struggle with that. Everyone has to struggle with that. But the institutionalized part is a strong piece here. If it were just individual racism that was the explanation for that gap, if it was just all the teachers that, were not educating minority children as well as white children, then you have a hard time explaining how that plays out in places like Washington, D.C. or Chicago, where the majority of the teachers are also teachers of color, or at least they were before they started getting dumped by the reform movement. It's a little side commentary. And so this issue is something that is deep, and it is about institutionalized racism. When we say, and Jeffrey, when you say that the system, public schools are broken, I can't remember the term you used, but they're not working. The conversation, and as a teacher, I make no apology if I sound a little defensive, but the conversation tends to turn to the individuals who work in that system, who are predominantly the teachers. And again, I would suggest that is looking at the wrong piece of the puzzle. Not that we don't have things to work on, we do, as I said, but it's the institutionalized racism, it's the practices that are in place that continue, and we just assume they're fine. How can a standardized test be anything but equitable? No, it might be equal, but it's not equitable. It might treat everybody equally. Equal is not equitable. There's a difference. So we need to look deeply at the institutionalized racism that's playing out, that is doing damage to the system. So I will just kind of leave it at that. Thank you.
Very quickly, it's another idea. My wife, Elaine Terone, runs the Center for Advanced Research and Language Acquisition at the University of Minnesota. And one of the things that's always puzzled me is we've been very open in Minnesota to bring in all these new Americans. So why in Minnesota have we not realized that we need more ESL teachers? I learned from the Wilder Foundation that we have the worst ratio in terms of ESL teachers to students who are English language learners in the United States of America, which was shocking to me when they did their report. On the other hand, if we want to succeed in the global economy, why don't we do something that will equalize students? Why don't we say, okay, everybody needs to learn English, and so we'll provide all the teachers that are necessary. At the same time, no child graduates from high school who cannot communicate at an 8th grade level in a second language. If we really want to compete in the global economy, why don't we equalize English-only people along with people who are having to learn English? And by the way, there's a very starting and seeming like successful school in North Minneapolis, Pierre Bottineau, which is a French immersion school that has mostly African-American kids in it. And they're doing very well. We've got a little more time to get the data on this, but it's just something that tells me if we don't think that kind of equity is important, it sort of is a hint to me at why we aren't solving the problem.
Thank you, Grant.
So,
Jeffrey?
Okay. We're sitting here, it seems like we're arguing on how to get our way back to mediocrity. How do we get our kids just to be okay? I mean, when do we stop thinking about being the best as a country? I mean, when do we stop trying to be, find our way back to first in the nation? Yep. And I thought that's what America was about. I thought that's what this experiment was about. God knows so many people paid with their lives for this to happen. Some of those were brought here against their will. I wish it was as simple as, racism from others is the only problem you have to worry about. It's the internalized racism that you have to worry about as well. Because a little kid that seems to think that he can't do because he is this or that, that's a lifelong problem. And I don't care how energetic you are in the classroom, how much you say, oh, Jimmy or Johnny, you're great, let's do it, until that root is taken out of his life and he sees his parents get an opportunity to succeed. He stops seeing the negative images on television about what his culture is supposed to be about. I mean, if it was just as simple as, boy, let's get the the most politically correct, highly educated, highly motivated teachers in a room and let's teach these kids, let's go, I think we would have already done it already. But I think we're selling ourselves short if we don't think this is a bigger problem than it is. It's an American problem. It's everybody's problem. Because we're just going to continue to get worse. This is a browning country. So all of a sudden you're going to look up in 2040, you're the minority. Right? And then where are you going to be at? Because you're holding on to this other thought of, well, let's just keep ours. As long as we're up here, people are down here, we're okay. It's got to be all of us up here.
Yep.
We got to all strive back to be the best. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, panelists, each and every one of you, and thank you for our audience. I also want to remind you that you can go to the League of Women Voters St. Paul website for our next monthly meetup, both the topic, the location, the date, and time, or certainly call our phone, and that's 651-789-0118. Again, that's 789-0118. Leave a message. We do have volunteers who staff the phone, and we'll get back to you with that information. I also want to thank the Wilder Foundation for providing the space today. And needless to say, SPNN, our St. Paul Neighborhood Network, who is providing both the taping and broadcasting of this important panel discussion on the achievement gap in our public schools. I should acknowledge once again our panel members, and I think our audience would love to give you a round of applause, so thank you. And, of course, not that we need to tape it, I do want you, each and every one of you, to know that we do have a candidate forum tomorrow evening, and Grant is the moderator of that particular forum, so he's good at reminding me. That is the St. Paul School Board. So you have the 5 candidates who are on the ballot. And the topic for that discussion is the achievement gap in the St. Paul schools. It is at the Hallie Q. Brown Martin Luther King Center. Obviously 270 Kent Street for those of you who are in the neighborhood at 7 to 8:30. That's tomorrow night, October 17th, 7 to 8:30 at Hallie Q. Brown Martin Luther King Center. The next forum after that is the Mayoral Forum. That will be Thursday, October 24th. 7 to 8:30 at the St. Paul School District Central Office at 360 Colburn. Again, all of that information is on our website. We are glad that you're able to go to our website, and we want to encourage you to go there for the latest. Just click on events, and it will drop down all the upcoming events that we have. Anything else? Thank you for being here.